Hello and welcome to our podcast. I'm Emma.
And I'm Max. We're so excited to have you here with us today as we talk about how you can improve your English by listening to podcasts. Emma, I think podcasts are such an amazing way to learn English, don't you?
Absolutely, Max. Podcasts are great because you can listen to them anywhere while you're driving, walking, even cooking. They're perfect for fitting English practice into your day without needing to sit down and study with a book.
That's right, and one of the best parts is that podcasts help you get used to how English really sounds. In many English classes, people learn formal phrases or sentences, but native speakers don't always talk that way. Listening to podcasts helps you understand casual English, which is so helpful if you want to sound natural.
Exactly. And for those of you at home who might be wondering, how do I choose a good podcast? Don't worry, we'll cover that. One thing I always tell my students is to look for podcasts that match their interests. It could be about cooking, sports, travel, or even personal stories. When you're interested in the topic, learning becomes fun, and you're more likely to keep listening.
Good point, Emma, and it doesn't have to be an advanced English podcast. Even listening to podcasts for English learners, like this one, can help a lot. Think of it as training your ears. Start with easier ones and slowly work your way up.
Yes, and if you find one you really enjoy, try listening to an episode more than once. The first time, you'll get the main ideas, and the second or third time, you'll notice smaller details like new words or phrases.
And speaking of new words, a lot of podcasts include transcripts. If you're not familiar with the word, you can look at the transcript and follow along. You might even pause and repeat some of the words to practice pronunciation.
That's a great tip, Max. Practicing with the transcript is a powerful way to improve both listening and speaking. It's like getting a mini English lesson while you listen. And you can learn pronunciation, rhythm, and how sentences flow in English, all without a teacher right there with you.
Right. Also, don't forget that you don't have to understand every single word to enjoy or learn from a podcast. The goal isn't to understand 100%, but to understand the main ideas. Over time, as you keep listening, you'll understand more and more, and it'll get easier.
Exactly. Sometimes when we listen to a new language, we want to know every word. But remember, even native speakers don't know every word. Focus on the main message, and don't be afraid to skip parts that are too difficult.
And here's another tip for all you listeners. Try to use what you learn. If you hear a new phrase or word, practice it. Maybe you can use it with a friend, or even just say it out loud a few times. Repeating helps it stick in your mind.
Yes, repetition really is key when learning a language. And don't be afraid to make mistakes.
So, let's talk more about how you can get the most out of listening to podcasts. One thing I find really helpful is setting a goal before you start listening. Emma, have you ever suggested that to your students?
Yes, I do. Setting a goal can be really useful. For example, maybe your goal is to learn 3 new words from each podcast episode. Or perhaps your goal is to understand the main idea of each part. Having a goal keeps you focused and makes the learning process a little easier to manage. Plus, it feels great when you achieve it.
That's so true, and I think another important part is taking notes. It might seem like a small thing, but writing down words or phrases that stand out can really help. Not only does it help you remember them better, but you can also go back and review them later.
Exactly, Max. Writing things down makes learning active instead of just passive listening. And it doesn't have to be a lot. Even just a few words or expressions you didn't know before can make a difference. When you write them down, try using them in your own sentences. For example, if you hear a new word like adventure, try writing a sentence like, "I want to go on an adventure someday." It helps you connect the word to your own life.
I love that. It's so much more effective when you make it personal. And here's a tip: after listening to an episode, tell someone about it. It could be a friend, family member, or even just speaking to yourself. Retelling the story or information helps you remember it better, and it forces you to practice speaking.
Yes, exactly. Teaching or explaining something to someone else is a powerful way to really learn it yourself. And even if you're just speaking out loud to yourself, it's still helpful. Imagine you just listen to a podcast about travel. You could say, in this podcast, they talked about amazing places to visit in Europe, and try to remember some details. It's great practice.
And speaking of practicing, don't forget that there's no rush. Language learning takes time, so don't feel bad if you don't understand everything right away. Listening to podcasts can be relaxing and enjoyable. You're still learning even if you don't catch every detail.
That's a very good point. Sometimes, learners feel pressure to understand everything or improve quickly, but it's okay to take your time. When you listen to podcasts, you're building skills little by little, even if you don't notice it right away. So don't give up. The small steps are important too.
Absolutely, and remember, it's also okay to rewind and listen 2 parts again if they're confusing. Sometimes you just need to hear something a second or third time to understand it better. There's no rule saying you have to listen to a podcast episode only once.
Exactly, Max. Replaying parts of a podcast can help with understanding. And sometimes, when you listen to the same part again, you'll suddenly notice things you missed the first time, like expressions or the tone of voice. These small details add up to help you understand the language better.
And tone of voice is really important. In English, how we say something often matters as much as what we say. Listening to a podcast can help you hear the difference between questions, statements, excitement, and even sarcasm.
Right, tone is something that's tricky to learn from textbooks alone, but it's very natural in podcasts. For example, if someone says, "Oh, great," in a cheerful voice, it means they're happy. But if they say it in a dull or low voice, it might mean they're annoyed. Learning to notice these little differences can really help with understanding real conversations.
And I think podcasts are also great because you're getting used to different accents. English is spoken in many countries, and accents can sound different depending on where the speaker is from. Getting used to different accents can make you a stronger listener.
Absolutely. Sometimes students feel frustrated when they don't understand an accent, but it's important to remember that English has many different sounds. The more you listen, the better you'll get at recognizing them. So if you hear British English, Australian English, or even different American accents, just think of it as practice.
That's a great way to think about it, and remember, it's okay if an accent is hard to understand at first. It's normal, especially for beginners. Just like with anything else, the more you listen, the easier it will get.
Exactly, Max. And don't forget, podcasts often talk about interesting topics that you can use in conversations with others. So let's say you listen to a podcast about cooking. You can then talk about cooking with your friends or even ask them about their favorite foods. Using what you learn makes it real and helps you remember it longer.
That's such a good tip, Emma. When you use English in your own life, it starts to feel more natural, and soon you'll notice yourself becoming more comfortable with it.
Another helpful tip is to listen actively. What I mean by that is not just letting the words pass by, but really paying attention. For example, when you're listening, try to ask yourself questions like, "What is this person trying to say?" Or "What's the main idea here?" When you actively think about what you're hearing, you understand more and remember it better.
That's a great point, Emma, and sometimes while you're listening, it helps to visualize what the speaker is saying. If they're describing a place, imagine it in your mind. If they're telling a story, picture the people or the situation. It helps make the language come alive.
Yes, visualization is a powerful technique. You could even close your eyes while listening if it helps you focus. I always tell my students that imagining the story or information in their minds can make it more engaging and memorable.
And if you're up for it, try summarizing what you just listened to. either out loud or in writing. Think about the main points and don't worry about making it perfect. Just say, okay, this is what I learned in your own words. Summarizing helps you understand the information better and boosts your confidence.
Absolutely. Summarizing is a great way to check if you've understood the main ideas. And it's okay if it's a little difficult at first. It's all practice. You could even write down 1 or 2 sentences after each podcast. Over time, you'll get faster and more comfortable summarizing what you hear.
And speaking of confidence, don't forget to celebrate small wins. If you listened to an episode and understood a few new phrases or even just got the general idea, that's a win. Language learning is a journey and every bit counts.
Yes, that's also important. Sometimes we focus too much on what we can't do yet, but celebrating what you can do is just as important. Maybe today you understood a full sentence you didn't know yesterday. Or perhaps you recognized a new word. These small moments of progress are big steps in the long run.
And here's a tip that can make podcasts even more effective. Try shadowing. Have you heard of shadowing, Emma?
Oh yes, shadowing is a fantastic technique. For those listening, shadowing means repeating what the speaker says right after they say it. It's like being an echo of the speaker. This practice can help you with pronunciation, rhythm, and sentence flow.
Yes, it can feel a bit strange at first, but it's a powerful way to improve speaking skills. You could start by choosing one sentence and repeating it, then work your way up to longer sections. Shadowing helps you sound more natural and confident.
And the great thing is, you don't have to understand every word to practice shadowing. Even if you're just focusing on the sounds or intonation, it's helpful. It's all about getting comfortable with the rhythm and flow of English.
And that rhythm is important. English has a certain melody to it, the way words rise and fall, the speed we use, the pauses. Shadowing helps you catch those details. Over time, you'll notice your own speaking becoming smoother and more natural.
Yes, and it's fun to notice how English can sound like music. Every language has its own rhythm, and with English, listening carefully to native speakers, like in podcasts, helps you hear that music. Eventually, you'll start to use that same rhythm in your own speech.
Definitely, and that brings me to another tip: be patient and kind to yourself. Sometimes language learning can feel frustrating, especially if you don't understand something right away. But remember, that's part of the process. Every time you listen to a podcast, you're improving, even if you don't see it right away.
Yes, being patient is so important. Learning a language is like growing a plant. You won't see it grow every day, but if you keep watering it, it will grow. And each time you listen, you're adding a bit of water to your English skills.
I love that comparison, Emma, and remember, learning should be enjoyable. Try to find podcasts that make you happy, that make you curious. When you enjoy what you're doing, it doesn't feel like work, and you're more likely to stick with it.
Exactly, Max. The most important thing is to keep going. Listen to topics you're interested in, take small notes, shadow when you can, and enjoy the process. It's not about being perfect. It's about making progress.
And on that note, we want to thank all of you for listening to us today. We hope these tips help you feel more confident about using podcasts to improve your English.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us. Remember, learning English is a journey, and you're doing amazing just by putting in the effort to listen and practice. We're really proud of you.
And if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We'd love it if you shared this podcast with your family and friends who are also learning English. The more, the merrier.
Absolutely, sharing is a great way to keep each other motivated. Thanks again for being here with us, and we can't wait to share more tips with you next time.
Goodbye, everyone, and happy learning.
Goodbye, and keep up the great work with your English.